The night the markets exploded past $100 a barrel did not begin with traders shouting on Wall Street or flashing red numbers on financial screens. It began far away from stock exchanges, out on dark waters where oil tankers normally glide silently through one of the most important passages on Earth. In that narrow stretch of water known as the Strait of Hormuz, something started burning. At first it looked like a distant fire on the horizon. Crew members aboard nearby vessels reported flashes, then smoke rising into the sky. Within minutes, emergency distress signals started spreading through maritime radio channels. Ships were reporting explosions, projectiles, and sudden fires spreading across decks carrying millions of barrels of oil. Some vessels tried to escape. Others were forced to stop as flames climbed higher and higher into the night. What began as a few isolated incidents quickly turned into something much bigger. Multiple ships were suddenly under attack. Reports began confirming that several tankers operating in the Persian Gulf had been struck by projectiles and explosive devices, leaving vessels burning in open water and sending shockwaves through global shipping routes. The moment the fires appeared on those ships, the world's energy system felt it instantly. Oil traders watching global markets saw the price spike in real time. Within hours, crude oil surged past $100 per barrel as panic spread through energy markets. And suddenly the question everyone was asking was the same. Had the war just backfired? Only days earlier, Donald Trump had promised that military pressure on Iran would secure stability in the region and protect global energy flows. The strategy, according to supporters, was meant to weaken Iran's ability to threaten shipping routes and restore order in the Gulf. But the events unfolding in the Strait told a very different story. Instead of calm, the sea had turned into a battlefield. Instead of stability, global markets were facing one of the largest energy shocks in decades. The Strait of Hormuz is not just another waterway on the map. It is the narrow maritime corridor through which nearly 1/5 of the world's oil supply travels every single day. Tankers carrying crude from the Middle East must pass through it to reach markets in Asia, Europe, and beyond. When that passage becomes dangerous, the entire global economy feels the pressure. And now ships were burning there. Satellite images soon began revealing the scale of the disruption. Tankers that normally move in long lines through the channel had suddenly stopped. Some anchored far from the entrance, unwilling to risk the journey. Others changed course entirely, abandoning routes that had been used for decades. Within days, maritime traffic through the strait collapsed dramatically. Insurance companies began refusing to cover ships entering the war zone. Shipping firms ordered captains to remain far away from the area. Oil companies scrambled to secure alternative supplies, but there were few options capable of replacing the millions of barrels that normally pass through that narrow corridor. Energy analysts began using words that had not been heard since the oil crises of the 20th century. Supply shock, energy crisis, global disruption. Meanwhile, the fires on those ships became symbols of something larger. Because the attacks were not just damaging vessels. They were sending a message. Iran had warned repeatedly that if its territory or energy infrastructure were attacked, the Strait of Hormuz could become a weapon. The country's naval forces and Revolutionary Guard units had spent years preparing for exactly this type of scenario, building fleets of fast attack boats, drones, and missile systems capable of targeting shipping traffic across the Gulf. Now those capabilities appeared to be in action. Explosive-laden boats and projectiles had struck vessels in the region, setting tankers ablaze and leaving crews scrambling for survival as fires spread across oil-filled decks. The impact on global energy markets was immediate. Brent crude surged above $100 per barrel for the first time in years as traders feared the disruption could remove millions of barrels of oil from global supply. Every dollar increase in oil prices rippled across the world economy. Gasoline costs rose. Transportation prices climbed. Industries dependent on fuel faced sudden uncertainty. And all of it traced back to the same place. Burning ships in a narrow stretch of water between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula. Inside Washington, the political pressure intensified quickly. Supporters of the war argued that the attacks proved Iran's aggressive intentions and justified stronger military action. Critics warned that the strategy had triggered exactly the scenario many experts feared, a confrontation that could destabilize global energy markets and drag the world into deeper conflict. Meanwhile, military forces across the region moved into high alert. Warships from multiple countries began repositioning near the Gulf. Fighter aircraft increased patrols above strategic shipping routes. Intelligence agencies monitored Iranian naval movements closely, watching for signs that the attacks could expand further. But the reality was already visible to everyone watching the markets. Oil had crossed the $100 threshold, and the fires on those ships were still burning. Even countries far away from the Middle East began feeling the consequences. Governments discussed releasing emergency oil reserves to stabilize prices. Energy ministers held urgent meetings. Economists warned that prolonged disruption could push global inflation even higher. The conflict had jumped from the battlefield to the economy. What made the situation even more dangerous was the uncertainty about what might happen next. The Strait of Hormuz is narrow in many places, barely 20 miles across. That means even small naval forces can threaten shipping traffic. Mines, drones, missiles, and fast attack boats can transform the waterway into a lethal trap for commercial vessels. And once shipping companies lose confidence in the safety of a route, the damage spreads quickly. Tankers stop sailing. Cargo delays increase. Prices rise. The global supply chain begins to strain. At the center of it all stood the political decision that had ignited the confrontation. The strikes on Iranian targets were meant to weaken Tehran's military position and force negotiations from a position of strength. Instead, the response had ignited a maritime conflict in one of the most economically sensitive regions on Earth. Burning ships had replaced quiet tanker convoys. Oil prices had replaced military victories as the headline dominating the world's attention. And the longer the crisis continued, the more difficult it would become to control. Because wars fought near the world's energy lifelines carry consequences far beyond the battlefield. They affect every driver filling a gas tank, every airline calculating fuel costs, every factory depending on transportation networks powered by oil. The flames rising from those ships were not just fires on the water. They were signals of how fragile the global system can be when geopolitics and energy collide. Somewhere out in the dark waters of the Gulf, emergency crews were still battling the fires aboard damaged vessels. Smoke continued drifting above the sea, visible from miles away. But the deeper impact of those flames was already spreading across the planet. Oil had crossed $100. Shipping routes were collapsing. And the war that was supposed to bring control to the region had instead ignited a crisis that no one could easily contain. Because when the world's most important oil corridor catches fire, the consequences do not stay in the ocean. They travel everywhere.